us. So we'll now move to the main items of business. I believe there are a number of people in the gallery who are here to hear particular items, so we might change the order of business slightly to ensure that you're able to hear that item relatively early, or the meeting can often go late into the night. So I'm going to propose that we move a general business item regarding the Oxygen Youth Centre first, the notice of motion regarding the Nightingale development, the Relay for Life notice of motion. Are there any other requests for bringing items up earlier? Councillor Thompson?
Notice of motion 6/16.
Yeah.
Planning discussions as well.
The PIDs.
Planning consultations and Pentridge Heritage.
One second, Pentridge Heritage. So that's the notice of motion of the Pentridge development or the Pentridge Heritage matters? The notice of motion or the councillor report?
Pentridge Heritage matters.
Okay.
But the planning consultation.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there no reports from mayors and councillors?
Yes, we'll move to that after the considering this reports, if that's okay. Yes.
I think we'll have to.
Oh, actually, we might do.
Voting method.
Yes, actually, we might do. We might do reports by mayors and councillors first before proceeding to those reports, and now you know the order of the agenda. So I might kick off, if it's okay, just with a couple of reports from me and just in response to a couple of the questions asked. Firstly, I'd like to declare that I have been endorsed by the Greens as a candidate for the upcoming federal election. And as per the MAV guidelines, I'm making this declaration at a council meeting. I wanted to reassure my fellow councillors and the community that this will in no way impact or compromise my work as the mayor. I plan to be a full-time mayor, as I have been since assuming the position last year. I have put the necessary measures in place to ensure that my position and resources that are provided to me in my role as mayor will not be used in any way to support my candidacy. My commitment is to the community of Moreland, councillors and the work of this council. I have informed my fellow councillors of my candidacy. I thank everyone for the support that I've received, and I look forward to a really fantastic year as the mayor of Moreland. On the next item, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Is it letter of the resident's letter? Next, I have a letter of thanks that a resident asked us to read out at a public meeting. And I'll read it out from this resident. His name is Mr. Kenneth Gant, and he said, "Dear Councillor Samantha Ratnam, my wishes are that this letter be read in open council to express my appreciation to Councillor John Kavanagh, who was extremely understanding of my problem following phone calls on the Sunday, the 31st of January 2016. He expressed his thanks for the follow-up work that Councillor Kavanagh performed that day, and has been a resident, he states, for 48 years, and wanted to pass on his thanks to this full public meeting." That deserves a clap too. And just another quick report, which is more by way of reminder and a way of concluding question time. As you saw tonight, we often have a number of questions that we want to have the time and space to be able to give people the opportunity to ask and speak directly to us. And one of the measures that we've put in place this year is to have a number of extra meetings that are going to be around the municipality so that we can actually provide more room and time for people to ask questions. So we're going to be conducting a series of extra councillor meetings coming up this year, and you'll get some dates that are posted on the website very soon. And they're going to be in Glenroy, Fawkner and Brunswick, a slightly different format which will actually give preeminence. The majority of the agenda will be for question time. So for those who might have not attended question time before, we hope that you learnt a little bit from this time, and we're looking forward to doing that more often around the municipality. So that's my report. Do we have any further reports from councillors? Councillor Bolton.
Well, I'd like to announce a win in the long struggle, a victory in the long struggle. Some people may be aware that there is a site in Glenroy on Hilton Road of an Aboriginal school which was closed down very unjustly by the state government in early 2012, and the young people, the teenagers at the school, were thrown out in order to shut the school and with no educational pathway provided to them. One of those students later on died in a car crash later that year, which led to a campaign to win back the site for an Aboriginal community hub. The council, because of a group of intrepid local community campaigners from a very, very disadvantaged community in Broadmeadows and Moreland, basically the Moreland Council became interested in the issue and has been providing some support to support of the residents in calling for this site to be retained in public hands for an Aboriginal community community hub. The Moreland Council came under heavy pressure from the state government at the end of last year, early this year, to sign off and allow the school to be sold. If it was sold, it would just simply go to high-rise and flats and so forth, and there was very heavy pressure. But basically, through the incredible work by the local Aboriginal community and the Wurundjeri Tribal Council, which are the traditional owners, this exerted enough pressure on the state government that they're going to hold off on the sale. And it is likely to be long enough for a feasibility study to investigate and do the sums on a First Nations community hub, which would be unite both the traditional owners and the Wurundjeri, the dispersed Aboriginal clans, because most of the Aboriginal people in the area come from the dispersed clans. They're not necessarily traditional owners, and the non-Indigenous community. So this has been a David and Goliath battle. We haven't won the full war. We've won a battle on the road, but I'd just certainly like to congratulate the Ballot Moreau Community Working Group for the incredible work they've done. And secondly, I'd like to just make mention that there was a protest at Pentridge, on Pentridge Boulevard, outside the site of a proposed 19-storey residential tower planned for behind the Watchtower on the corner of Pentridge Boulevard and Stockade Avenue, which would totally dwarf the Pentridge prison wall and the Watchtower. Through this protest and some of the work in the lead up to this, we started to find different groups of residents who were outraged by this proposal and have been involved in things like trying to protect the heritage overlay and Champ Street, people who had heard about the 19-storey tower and other issues in Pentridge. And I think there's a lot of interest amongst residents who'd formerly thought that this was signed, sealed and delivered. There's nothing we can do to stop the destruction that's happening. And there will be a public meeting on the 10th of March, so look out for more information.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. And on that note, I'd also like to thank you for all your advocacy and your tireless work in the Ballot Moreau College campaign. As you said, we haven't won the full fight yet, but this is a significant step forward, and we are united in our efforts to ensure this land stays in public hands. Are there any further reports from councillors? Councillor Tapinos?
I'll just speak briefly because I've committed on behalf of the Brunswick Sydney Road Traders Association to table this document tonight, which is a response to some of the issues on Sydney Road. And of course, we've had a lot of debates in the chamber in regards to the future of Sydney Road and what we'll do about car parking and pedestrian safety and cycling safety. And I was very pleased to be able to table about a year ago or earlier in the previous year a report on from Revitalising Sydney Road, which is a cycling group. So I like to table the traders' perspective as well for consideration by council and for further information in our decision making. And I'd like to request that perhaps under the minutes from committees probably be formed part of the next agenda for council meetings, so we can have it there on record and the community can also see it for it to be public and also provide a feedback on it. So I'll circulate those to councillors now, but I just wanted to table those on behalf of the association and also ask the council to consider its views in its decision making in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tapinos. Any further reports?
Yep.
Yeah, Councillor Gillies, sorry.
That's all right.
For those of you who don't know, I have a monthly ward meeting at the Glenroy RSL, the third the last Thursday of every month, and I just want to report back as to December's. There are a number of issues that were brought up by residents. One, of course, is the continuing plague of rogue developers, as they've now been named by residents. And I came face to face with one over the Christmas break when I went to drop off a baby present to my cousin who lives in Moreland, who's just had a baby. He lives in Brunswick Melville Road, and across the road was a developer who had blocked half the road with no traffic management at all. It was about 40-something degrees. It was pretty hot, so I walked over and actually asked whether or not he had a traffic management plan, to which he said he didn't need one, even though he had half the road blocked off. And to cut a long story short, I stayed for a while and watched them move trucks and people and all sorts of things. Also told him that he needed to give his workers water because we didn't want anyone, collapsing from heat. But the reality is that this is happening all the time. You can drive down one street in the city of Moreland and there can be a developer who plays by the rules, doesn't wreck the pavement and the nature strip, and, his site's clean when he finishes at the end of the day. And right across the road you can have a developer who has, and this is an exact actual example, there is a hole in the nature strip with a tiny bit of what we call in the industry idiot tape. I'm sorry about that, but that's what we call it. I don't know what the real word for it is. That has maybe one or two sticks holding it up. Anyone walking down that particular street with a dog or whatever at night could fall down and break a leg very easily, and that can stay in that particular spot wide open to the public for 3, 4, 5 weeks. So I'm really looking forward to the report from council about how many building inspectors we need to put on in order to actually start monitoring this properly, because we're not at the moment. I do know that Yarra City Council have 16 building investigators. We don't have anywhere near that. And we obviously need them to ensure that developers are meeting our expectations, the permit expectations, and keeping them within the confines of the law, really. Other than that, also, there are a lot of bicycle riders in the Northwest Ward who are very angry and want bike paths and say that they're being left out in the cold. And as you all know, I'm saying that on behalf of residents because I have a bike but I've never ridden it. That doesn't mean that one day I won't, okay? So don't stone me yet, but I am bringing that up because it is of concern. And for those residents who do want to actually ride and get healthy, they should have access to that. And that's about it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gillies. I don't believe we have any further reports. No? Thank you very much for all the work that everyone does around this table. We're now moving to the presentation of reports and items, and as we noted before, we're going to move a few of those items forward. So I'd like first to proceed with the Oxygen Youth Centre, if everyone's okay for me to move that, which is a general business item, and I'm happy to move that from the chair. And that motion is that Council receives a report outlining what additional preparation work is required to progress stages 2 and 3 of the Oxygen Centre construction, including any revision of designs, plans and cost estimates that might be required. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Yildiz. Councillor Tapinos?
Yildiz up there.
Yes, I believe Councillor Yildiz want to second that. Councillor Tapinos, are you happy for Councillor Yildiz to second that?
Yeah.
As a co-councillor responsible for youth.
Tapinos.
Just speaking very briefly to this, and thank you to all the members of Oxygen who've stayed the course for this meeting. As you are well aware and you've been advocating very strongly for, we have plans to continue the construction of the Oxygen Youth Centre. The first stage, which is fully in flight, has been oversubscribed, so well used, is such a thriving space, and every report we hear is just of how successful a space it has been for the young people of Moreland, and we know that your work has contributed to bringing it to life. So I want to really sincerely thank you for all that work and the work you continue to do, the work that you do with its surveys informs the work we do, and we rely very heavily upon it. As we start planning for the construction of stages 2 and 3, we're ready to implement those projects, and they've been budgeted for in the next few years, and we're planning to move forward with that. What this report asks for is to see whether, essentially a status update, given that the plans and designs were drawn up a couple of years ago, just to ensure if there are any obstacles in actually this construction proceeding as quickly as possible once it's budgeted for, that we can work through those challenges and obstacles now. So it's asking for a status update so that we're ready to construct the projects as soon as we adopt the budgets for the next few years. Councillor Yildiz, would you like to say anything on this item?
No, look, I'm just glad that this has come forward at this stage of the year, and hoping that it's good to see all our young youth and youth here, but I know how long some of you guys have been involved, so it has been utilised quite well, the venue, and every time I drive past I feel quite proud that there's always someone out the front or some cars always parked there. It just shows that it is being utilised efficiently. So we hope that this stage gets up and running quite quickly. So very proud to see it moving on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Yildiz. Is there any further comment or debate on this item? No? In that case, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Declare that carried. Thank you very much, councillors. Thank you for attending the meeting. You're welcome to stay on. We might move on to DSD 116, which is the Relay for Life. Do I have a councillor who wishes to move this item? It's DSD 116, Relay for Life. Councillor Hopper? And is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Hopper, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, certainly. I'll just bring it up on my screen. I apologise, it's a different order to what I was expecting. So we were approached last year while I was mayor as well by Relay for Life to sponsor the hire fee for the facility that they use to conduct Relay for Life. It was in Coburg last year. I believe it's not this year, but council has been very actively involved in Relay for Life for a number of years now, including contributing a council team with councillors walking around. Yes. Oh, really? I'm so well. Not me.
It's in,
but I will
it's
do
in
it.
process.
There we go. The mayor will organise that and I will be part of the team quite happily. And one year I think I signed up for 2 hours and ended up walking around for 4 because I just kept meeting people and talking to them. But it's a great event annually that raises money for very worthy cancer causes, and so I do encourage people to get involved. What was unfortunately happening was that the Cancer Council was having to come to us every single year and ask for exactly the same sponsorship every year and the same support for their organisation. And so last year, when putting the motion for council to support it, I suggested that instead we put in place a policy that would allow that to come back to us automatically every year and save them the effort and the time of having to come back to us every year and ask for the same thing when we've obviously been supportive of it on a regular basis. So I'm very pleased to see this report come back to us at council, and I'm looking forward to continuing to see council support this worthwhile event.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper. Councillor Kavanagh, would you like to say something?
No, I think Councillor Hopper's summarised it well.
Great, thank you. Is there any further debate on this item? No? Then I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you very much. No problem. We look forward to registering the team. It's in process, I promise you. We've actioned it. We might now move to Notice of Motion 116, which is a Nightingale development at 6 Florence Street, Brunswick. And I'm the mover of this motion, so I will outline the proposal. And that is that Council resolves to write to Victoria's Planning Minister to call in MPS 2015-829, 6 Florence Street, Brunswick, the Nightingale project for a decision. And if I have a seconder, I'm happy to speak to it. Councillor Gillies, thank you very much. Thank you, councillors and members of the gallery, and for all the proponents who came and spoke and asked questions previously and in the meetings previously regarding this project. I'll address some of the concerns. As most of you are aware, as have been outlined in the questions, this has been a long, drawn-out process. A number of us were very shocked by VCAT's recent decision to refuse the application, the original application. And since then, what we've seen VCAT do is approve another building that has asked for zero car parking, and some would argue in a less accessible spot to public transport, and has granted the approval for that building. And it was on the same point of contention, which was zero car parking, so full car parking waivers that both applications were fought over. So we've seen very, very contrasting decisions from BCAT in a very short space of time, and I think that's one of the reasons why this application and project has got so much media attention. We've heard lots from the public and continue to do so, and people are watching to see what happens in terms of the precedent it sets given the state significance of projects like these, projects that aim to keep prices affordable, try to work towards standards of environmental sustainable design that we haven't seen before, that are trying to change the model of development and the way it happens in our municipality and across the state. These are transformative types of developments, which is why it's got the attention that it has, which is why we have paid so much attention to this application at council. I hear Councillor Hopper's concerns around the process, so I just want to clarify a couple of things. One, I think it's important for a full council to make a decision for a minister to call in a planning application, given the weight of the call-in, given the weight of the request. There are a couple of things that could happen. We are asking for the minister to call in the application. We're not asking for when the minister can call in the application. It will be up to the minister to decide when he wishes to call in the application. Now, that might be after the Urban Planning Committee has heard the proposal. I hear that it's a slightly different proposal and needs the airtime at the UPC. But one of my concerns is if that at the UPC, the planning application is approved and we signal that if there's going to be an objection, that it's going to get called in by the minister. I'm not sure about the climate that we create and the fairness we create for anybody who potentially wishes to object, which is why I think we want to take the decision or ask the minister to call in the decision to take a broad view of this and identify the time that it's necessary to call in the application. Earlier, a couple of months ago, the minister outlined a couple of considerations that he would take into mind when deciding if he would or not call the application in. One of those things was a public airing of the new proposal, and we have had an exhibition period of the application, and he wanted a request from council to call it in. So I believe it's a project of such significance that a full council needs to make that decision. I don't want to usurp the power of the UPC, but I think in terms of the process and in terms of what climate we can set up if we say the UPC is going to make this decision, if there's an objector after it's potentially approved, it might not be approved, sets the wrong tone for the type of decision-making forum that the UPC is. So I believe that the full council should consider it. We could wait till March and wait till the decision of the UPC, but I think this project has been delayed enough. And I think people are waiting to see what happens with this project so we can see more projects like this developed in our community. So that's why I'm putting this forward. Councillor Yildiz, would you like to say something?
I think my biggest concern is, in fact, that not knocking UPC, but if we go to UPC and there aren't enough councillors, the decision can't be made, there's no quorum, there's a further delay. So let's get on with it. We've made these people wait enough, and I think I think the whole council needs to make that call.
Thank you, Councillor Yildiz. Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Kavanagh?
I want to speak against the motion. Only because, for one reason and one reason only. I actually don't think the minister should have the power to make decisions on his or her own. I've argued that when we talk about the Pentridge development and how we had ministerial approval, I don't think it's right that a minister has that right, that ability. Yes, at local government level, a councillor can call in an item, but when a councillor calls in an item, the item is still decided by either the Urban Planning Committee or the full council. It's not decided by one person. I don't believe a minister should have that power. Minister Madden previously has used that power, in my opinion, to give us a development over there in Pentridge, which is below par. Minister Guy has called in, previous Minister Guy has called in things in Moreland. And they do it in their own office with their own stroke of a pen. I think it's wrong. If a minister was to make it, if we were to call into the minister and then Parliament makes a decision, I'm happy with that. But I just because on this particular one, I happen to want this to be approved, doesn't mean that I should allow the minister to exercise power that I don't believe he should have.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Do I have a speaker for the motion? Councillor Thompson?
I stand to speak for the motion outlined on 281. And just to sort of say that UPC is considering this application in its February meeting in 2 weeks, so it is going to UPC, and a resolution will be made by the committee there. And I've had some unsavoury information brought to my attention about this particular application, and I think that going on what VCAT has previously done on this decision, that a call up to the Minister's office is adequate, and it should sort of be, he should be subjected to making a decision that he has previously said that he was looking at it being such a state significance. So I wholeheartedly agree with this motion and know that it is coming to UPC, and given VCAT's recent decisions, I think it should be put into the forecourt of the Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Thompson. I believe Councillor Hopper wanted to speak again, so I might go to her first.
I'm against as well.
Okay, Councillor Hopper first, yep.
Thank you for allowing me to speak against, and this is the first time that I've ever spoken against anything in relation to Nightingale, and I really regret that I have to do so. And in speaking against this, I am foreshadowing a motion that Council refer this matter to Urban Planning Committee for its decision and potential call-in by the Minister as per Council's November decision. Look, I've been supportive of the Commons and Nightingale from the get-go, and I think that most of the people in the audience who are associated with the Commons, Jeremy and Tamara, you've had me around to your house. Like, I've met you on so many occasions. I have so much support for the work that you are doing, which is why on numerous occasions in this council chamber, I've raised motions in relation to supporting Nightingale, in relation to changing legislation around car parking in apartment dwellings. I've certainly commented on the record on numerous occasions about what happened on Lygon Street and the fact that zero car parking has been approved there. Complete insanity, you know, when that's nowhere near the train line, whereas you're right next to the train line. I don't need to be sold on these arguments. I absolutely appreciate them. And from November, I've been convinced of the potential need to support a call-in to the Minister, and that is something that I'm very supportive of. But I cannot understand why this motion is coming to tonight's council meeting when we have an urban planning committee determining this decision in 2 weeks' time. And up until this point, Councillor Ratnam and I have worked together very closely to support Nightingale, and you've met with us jointly on various occasions, but I haven't been involved in this motion, and I'm going to say that I believe it's a political wedge based on the motion that I put up in November to try and interfere in that when it's coming to Urban Planning Committee in just 2 weeks' time. I think that trying to determine this now in a notice of motion before councillors that doesn't go into the level of detail and the level of research with our planning department and the level of work that the motion I put up in November did and the level of detail that an urban planning committee report would is a really poor decision. I just don't think it's good governance. I don't think it's good decision making, and so I can't support doing this tonight, but I hope that councillors will support my foreshadowed motion, which involves doing this in 2 weeks' time.
Councillor Tapinos, who wishes to speak?
I'm speaking against.
Yes, any further speakers for? Councillor
Can I just ask
Tapinos?
a question?
Certainly, I'll ask the question first.
May I just ask a question of the Mayor? Given obviously that the previous Mayor had received advice from Council, what has made you change, change our approach really?
So my concerns are a couple of scenarios in terms of which is a better process. And I think it's an issue of which is a better process because there's quite a few councillors in support of the Minister calling it in, given the worry and concern we have around VCAT's decision-making capacities over the last couple of months and the consistency of it. So it's about the better approach. I'd like this to happen as quickly as possible, so this hastens the process in some ways. But I also looked at the scenario of what if the UPC approves the application? What grounds do we have the Minister to call it in if the UPC has approved the application? Now we're granting a planning permit, and then we're saying, please, Minister, call in the application to approve it again. That raises, in my mind, a number of grey areas. Now, there might be an objector who then objects to the application and takes it to VCAT, and that's the grounds for the Minister to call it in. But then you're looking at 20 days that the objector has to get in their objection. Then we're looking at 4 weeks to 6 weeks from now when that process even starts. Then we have to wait for the letter to go, for the Minister to consider it. This project has been delayed enough, and I feel like if we pass this overarching motion now, we have the discretion of when we send the letter. We can hold off if we want to for a couple of weeks. We might wait till the Urban Planning Committee makes its decision. But what we're asking for is the minister to make the decision on it in terms of the best process. I think there's pros and cons of each, but I believe this is the best process. And I do believe that the full council should make a decision in regards to a minister calling in a planning application, just given its significance. We are the full council sitting here, and I believe that we should be the ones making the decision. And I respect the work of the UPC, but I believe we're all here so we can make the decision tonight. Councillor Tapinos?
Thank you. This is quite an interesting debate, and one which I like to contribute, but not necessarily about the Nightingale project, which is a project which I think is exemplary. It's got great design features and one I've been supportive of and would like to see built in our city. But I think it's an interesting debate because it does talk about process. And I echo the views of Councillor Kavanagh in standing when he says about the past performance of planning ministers. And I too believe nothing good actually comes when planning ministers make decisions, particularly we've seen in our city, the Brunswick Terminal Station and of course the master plan for Pentridge and how woeful decisions they have been at the stroke of a pen by the minister. So I don't think that is good process. And I don't think sending anything to the minister, bypassing our community, bypassing the democratically elected councillors is the way to go. And I think that we might be setting a very dangerous precedent if we were to support this here today. There is a planning process that we go through. Sometimes we don't like the outcomes, but it affords everyone an opportunity, a right of appeal to VCAT. That is a fundamental right. What you are seeking tonight is to deny that right to residents to appeal to VCAT. That's what you are seeking if you are referring this to the minister. You are denying residents, whether they are pro, and in this case many of them are, or anti, a right to appeal before the planning committee and get natural justice to know that their voice is being heard prior to a decision. Quite frankly, I'm very concerned that this is in the chamber. I'm concerned that if we approve this, we are effectively making a determination on the application now, without having heard those voices, without considering the report. In fact, I'm so concerned I would go as far as to say that we may be even predetermining the application and denying the applicants and objectors natural justice. And I think that is something that we should be mindful about, particularly in planning matters. This is a development application by a developer. I understand and I appreciate and I think it's great work that they do in regards to the social justice elements and having a balance to select people and keeping those prices low. And we need to pursue that, and we could advocate to the various state bodies and other authorities to take that model up, and that's something I wish does occur. But the fact of the matter is, it is a development. Why are we giving it any more special treatment than what we already have? And we have already. Had it been another private development, there would be serious questions raised by this council. Now, having said that, I recognise the value and the outstanding contribution that this development will make in our city, and I think others do. But we need to be very careful about the processes. The planning laws are there to provide protection for all, and we can't just say we should usurp the processes, fast track something, because when you go fast, you might just stumble and it might be more painful than actually going through the proper processes to begin with.
Thank you, Councillor Tapinos. Are there any further comments or any further debate? No? I might exercise my right to conclude the debate then very, very briefly, just to summarise a couple of points which I think are really valuable in terms of the debate that we've had. And we've definitely heard there's some concerns about the process, about which is the better process, whether the full council or the urban planning committee should make the decision. But I also think we've heard from councillors who don't believe that we should be asking for the minister to call in any decision. So I think there are different forms of objection, and I think that's worth considering in the decision we're making tonight, because in some ways that will be replicated at the urban planning committee itself if there's a motion for the urban planning committee to request that the minister call it in. So I think that's worth considering. So on that note, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that lost. And could I call for division, please? We're moving on now to the next...
I'd like to move my foreshadowed motion.
Okay, sure. Councillor Copper?
My foreshadowed motion that Council refer this matter to Urban Planning Committee for its decision and potential call-in by the Minister as per Council's November decision.
Is there a seconder?
Can I ask a question?
So, Councillor Gillies is a seconder. Councillor Kavanagh?
It's already on the agenda for the planning committee, isn't it?
Yes,
so
it is.
Why do we need such a motion?
I was going to ask the same question. I
I
think it's
foreshadowed
redundant.
it, and so I thought that from a good practice perspective, I should move it, given that it was foreshadowed during the debate. I can withdraw it if
I
you feel
wouldn't
that it's
mind because it
unnecessary.
does include referring to the minister again, and I'll be, but I'll say how I vote on the night yet because I haven't heard of it. But that would be one aspect that I'd have a concern with.
Sure.
I'm
I'm happy to
withdrawing the
withdraw.
motion, Councillor Hopper. Thank you. We're moving on to the next item of business. Thank you to all in the gallery who came to hear that item. We are now moving on to Notice of Motion 616, which is the Vision Super Fossil Fuel Divestment. Do I have a mover for this motion? Councillor Thompson?
Thank you. I'd like to move the recommendations on page 286, 287, which read that the Council resolved to write to Vision Super expressing Council's concern about Vision Super's investment in fossil fuel and associated industries, ask that Vision Super share with Council what plans that it has in place to divest from fossil fuel companies and infrastructure, and what steps Vision Super is taking to manage climate risk for its members. As outlined by Market Forces, a recommendation that was provided to us during question time by Simon. And in that including A, to quantify and manage climate risks to its current portfolio, B, disclose fossil fuel exposure holdings to its members, and C, divest from pure play fossil fuel companies, companies that are mining fuel or mining coal directly, and D, to increase investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency. E, engage with diversified companies and companies at risk to encourage them to phase out fossil fuel exposure. F, to minimise fossil fuel exposure in portfolios by divesting from diversified companies that contribute to do business with fossil fuels without a plan for avoiding stranded assets and climate risk. And G, for ongoing reporting to members about climate risk and fossil fuel exposure as the above steps are undertaken. And also T, to write to all councils in Victoria, the Australian Services Union, the Municipal Association of Victoria, the Victorian Local Governance Association, outlining Council's position on fossil fuel divestment and its support for divestment from fossil fuel investments by superannuation companies, and request their support for this action. It's a long-winded motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Is there a seconder for this motion?
If Councillor Thompson was prepared to accept a small addition.
Councillor Bolton, I think we need a seconder first before we start proposing amendments. I'm prepared to second the motion if there is no... Councillor Kavanagh is going to second the motion. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor
Yes.
Thompson? I'll then hear the amendment.
Sure, I'll take your amendment. I'm happy to take your amendment first, if it's... I'm happy to take Councillor
Certainly.
Bolton's
Councillor Bolton, do you want to have the amendment?
I'm just wondering if you consider an addition of a point H, that a report come to the April Council meeting on Vision Super's response or non-response.
Oh.
Okay, yep, I'm in support of that. I guess we're just putting a timeline on when Vision Super is to report back to us. Yep, that's more than fine. April. Can I defer?
Acceptable to the seconder and mover?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to add that additional point. Would you like to speak to the motion now, Councillor Thompson?
Sure. So this motion has come out to us from Market Forces and community members that are concerned about where super funds are investing monies to fossil fuel projects, and I thank them for their contribution and continued advocacy in this area. I think they've left now, and certainly see that through Simon's question time. He was talking about why they've approached Vision Super, and because that it is associated with local government, it's the default super fund. So what this motion is asking is that they look at what practices they're currently doing to divest any investments to fossil fuels, and what they're doing in terms of reporting it back to members and ensuring that any investments that they do make are climate responsible and are returning a positive investment, because as Simon highlighted, it's currently at a deficit. So this motion is in line with other divestment strategies that we've pushed, and certainly something that Moreland is renowned for in terms of being a more sustainable council.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Kavanagh, would you like to speak to this motion?
Just to thank Market Forces for their work, and also particularly in standing outside the depot and speaking to the actual members about them. I think that's a really good initiative, and congratulate them on that.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Is there a speaker against the motion? I'll take it first against. Any speakers against the motion?
I just wanted to make a note.
One second. I'm just going to speak.
I'm not necessarily speaking against, but I did want to raise, and perhaps an amendment might suit this, but I do think that, so if you can excuse me by maybe speaking a little bit first and then maybe proposing what I want, I do think we need to work with Vision Super and certainly make them aware of Council's position. So I'm just concerned that this letter might actually come across quite aggressive if we're expressing concerns. I'd much rather it said something like that Council work with Vision Super to develop or assist them in developing divestment strategies from fossil fuel. I think that would be a greater way to go.
I might just reply very briefly in helping draft some of the motion. That is definitely the intent. It has gone through some machinations, and the intent of this motion is to start a dialogue with Vision Super, being one of the first councillors to advocate for this, and the tone of the letter will definitely reflect a spirit of dialogue and not just criticism. Councillor Hopper, you wanted to declare something?
Look, just for the sake of transparency, because people just saw me run to the Director of Corporate Services and back, the motion concerns writing to the Australian Services Union. I'm a member of the Australian Services Union.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper. Any speakers for the motion?
Can I just say, I support the motion. Industry super funds, it doesn't detract from the fact that industry super funds are actually the best performing super funds, and that's because they're not private super funds, and we should all be exploring those. I would like to say that as an ex-branch coordinator of the Australian Services Union, you may wish to, prior to writing the letter or at the same time, have a meeting with the Secretary of the Australian Services Union, who's on the board, and also the ex-Secretary of the is the Chairman of Vision Super. So it would be worth having a discussion with them, because that is a very formal letter, and to open the way for good communication, I think that would be worthwhile.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. They're very good suggestions, and as I stated, it is in the spirit of dialogue that we're going to go, so we'll heed those suggestions. Are there any further speakers on this item? Councillor Bolton, I'll take you as a final speaker, and then we'll move.
In support of the motion, I think these divestment campaigns have been a way of giving people an opportunity to show their desire to try and stop the climate change, which is already happening. I believe the campaign has already been in touch with the Australian Services Union. I'm not sure at what level. I know delegates, hopefully the State Secretary as well, because obviously, you don't want to jeopardise the question of industry super funds. But I think there is a real need with a whole lot of the super funds, and I think if Vision Super became the first industry super fund to divest, I think that would send a bit of a signal to other super funds, both industry funds as well as profit-driven funds. So, I think this has been great, and I understand there's been a really good response from both white-collar and blue-collar members of the ASU to this campaign. I'm sure there's some who might not agree, but I believe it's been a really positive response. So
I vaguely remember Vision Super talking about having options around that, though.
Sorry, we're moving into the full part of the meeting now. I'd like now to put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried. Thank you very much.
Can we make that marked as unanimous?
Yes, we'll note that as unanimous. And councillors, I note that there have been some requests for a quick adjournment because we have been going for a couple of hours now, but we have a couple of items that there are members in the gallery for. Yes, I'm asking councillors if it's okay if we do there's 3 items: a planning information discussion session, the Pentridge Heritage Matters, and there's a general business item regarding the street tree removal by Councillor Kavanagh that we'd like to.
And I think some people are here for the attendance versus posted voting.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so there's 4 items.
And also this gentleman from South Street.
Yes.
Councillors happy to proceed and get through those items, those 4 or 5 items? Okay.
Can I just mention just almost a
Councillor
point of
Tapinos?
order if you wish, but I believe that priority really should be given to the prioritised council reports ahead of general business items. They are in the agenda. We've received notice for them. They are the core items of business the organisation has been working on. So I would prefer that in the future if we could prioritise in the prioritised section officer reports.
I appreciate that, Councillor Tapinos, and that's how we normally try to organise our business. However, just for the courtesy of the members of the gallery, given the nature of the meetings can go quite late, out of courtesy, I'd like to move those items first. And Councillor Yildiz, you want to make a quick statement about process, and then I'm going to move on.
You make a comment on every single report. These people don't want to be here till 1 a.m.
Councillor Yildiz, future point, thank you. We appreciate that. Let's try and move forward so we don't take any more time with procedural matters. But Councillor Tapinos, I hear your concern, and definitely we're working to the substantive business that's on the agenda. So we'll now move on quickly to Notice of Motion 916, Planning and Information Discussion Meetings. Councillor Bolton, do you wish to propose this?
I'd like to move that Council adopts a practice whereby all registered objectors to a planning application will be invited to any planning information discussion or planning consultation meetings that take place, and that the current practice of officers determining which of the objectors is entitled to an invitation cease.
Do I have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Gillies, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Bolton, thank you.
Yes, I would like to speak to the motion. I understand there has been some discussion at these meetings between senior officers and councillors at one of the briefings, and I've also discussed with the manager of planning about this approach of the councils. My feeling is, and especially after this Bell Street development, which a resident earlier tonight mentioned, where only one objector turned up at a particular meeting, was only one resident objector was invited to the meeting and felt very intimidated about having to face a number of experts employed by the developer, as well as council planners who are also experts in the field, and took it upon themselves to invite other objectors. Now, in this particular case, the objector actually knew some of the other objectors, which isn't always the case. So this objector was able to rustle up a little bit of support so that, he could have some assistance from other objectors. But also, it's not only the adjacent property which is affected by a particular development, and also sometimes there might be an impact of a particular development that maybe the adjacent property owner isn't aware of, which they might find out from a meeting which involves all of the objectors, because residents have all sorts of different levels of skill and knowledge about these various planning matters. And while I understand, yes, it can be difficult for planners where sometimes there are different viewpoints expressed at some of these meetings, I think a lot of residents will be shocked to find out that it is possible for a planning consultation to occur where only some of the objectors are invited. I think it is a fundamental issue of democracy, and often people don't realise what level of democracy they have until they try and exercise that democracy. And I would assume that most people don't have engagement with planners and councils and so forth until there is something that they object to being built right beside them or that impacts on their neighbourhood. And it's only then that they engage with government or council to try and address the issue. And then I think this practice would fundamentally affect people's confidence in council to think that, as a little resident, and I'm saying that not in a pejorative sense, in the sense that a resident who hasn't got all the training and skills of the developer's experts has to come and argue their case. They might not use the proper planning lingo.
Sorry, Councillor Bolton,
I just think this is a very undemocratic process.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton.
Council's support.
Thank you. Councillor Gillies, Councillor Gillies is seconding the motion. Would you like to speak to it?
Fine.
Okay. Are there any speakers against the motion?
Can I just ask a question? If there's 210 objectors, so does that mean, have we got the resources to write 210 letters? We do have those.
Oh, we do.
Hold on, I'd like to get one response. I think there's a question to the director. I'm going to get the director to respond to that. There'll be time for further debate. I'd like the director to respond to that question of clarification.
Certainly through the mayor, if there was a requirement to send 200 letters, then we would make those letters.
So, yeah, but my question is, if this happened all the time, we're going to waste our time writing letters to, which we, how have we been doing it in the past? I'm just thinking, why do we have to waste all those resources? Because the residents, if they've objected, they're invited then and there, aren't they? Or aren't they notified through other means rather than go through this whole process? How are they? What's the process when they get notified anyway?
Okay, I'll just ask.
Can we just reiterate that?
Yes, we'll get the director to outline the current process and then move on to the questions.
My understanding of the process is that there are two decisions made around PIDs. The planning information and discussion is a forum that is purely about information dissemination, and letters are sent to all objectors. The consultation sessions are mediation sessions, and that's where it's the generally it's you identify those people where their objection is outlined something that could be mediated. So there's quite a bit of difference between the two forums.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on, but there will be further clarification, Councillor Yildiz, I think, through the debate, and we'll come back to any further questions you have. I think it's going to be illustrated. Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Davidson.
I'd like to speak against the motion. The democratic process happens when we have the actual committee meeting. The committee meeting is held here, and objectors and applicants come to the meeting and approach councillors who sit on the Urban Planning Committee, where we've got the information presented by the officers and we make a decision on that night about their application and hear both sides of the argument. The consultation process is an opportunity, and I'm satisfied that the officers, in their capacity, make the decision who they choose to involve in that process and the applications that warrant that process. It's not going to be practicable to have every consultation for a planning application come before council, and the officers play their role and councillors play their role when they're deciding applications at the Urban Planning Committee, and I'm satisfied that process works very well.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Have you got a speaker in favour of the motion? Councillor Hopper?
Yeah, I'll speak in favour of the motion. And I know that Councillor Yildiz raised the example of if you have 200 objectors to something. In fact, the year before last, we had an example of the Oak Park Fish and Chip Shop where we had 699 objectors. And I am absolutely satisfied with the fact that we wrote to every single one of those 699 objectors and invited them to be part of a discussion around that development, because that hugely affected Winifred Street. That was a 4-storey development in the middle of a very suburban street, and they had every right to be part of that discussion in the lead up to a decision being made at Urban Planning Committee. I think that Councillor Bolton raises really relevant points in that, you know, residents don't understand the planning process in the way that we do, and nor should they have to. You know, this is an opportunity for them to come and have explained to them the impact that developers are going to have on their street and their neighbourhood. It's also an opportunity for them to talk to developers about the concerns that they have with the application and ask developers to consider making changes to the application before it comes to Urban Planning Committee. It's not a negotiation per se, but we have had examples where things have come before Urban Planning Committee in a different state to the way they were when they were originally lodged with our planning department, because, you know, residents have gone to a PID and they've said, if you could just remove a couple of extra inches off the side of this building, if you could just put in one extra car park, even in some cases somebody's removed an entire unit because residents have turned up to a PID and said, look, this is really infringing on my right as a neighbour, could you do this? And good developers have said, well, yes, I will, because I've heard your side of the story now and I understand the impact that it's going to have on my neighbourhood. So I think that PIDs are very important, and this in no way results in all councillors having to make a decision on every item. It's just providing an opportunity to make sure that every person who objects to a planning determination is invited to the PID when it's held.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper. Are there any further speakers against? Councillor Tapinos, are you going to speak against? I'd like to... I'm going to express some concerns. I'm happy to speak next. Are you going to speak for? Are you going to speak in favour of the motion?
No, I'll be speaking in favour of the motion.
You'll be speaking in favour of the motion. Okay, so I'd like to, just in terms of the format of the agenda, we try to take one for and against. As I've outlined to Councillor Bolton.
Just a point of order.
Yes.
It's normally custom that when the Mayor speaks to hand over the chair.
We haven't been following that custom in the last few meetings, Councillor Tapinos. I've been able to speak from the chair with the Lord of Council, yes.
Just believe you have a chair or you engage in a debate, and that's common practice.
I'd like to speak from the chair about some concerns I have with this proposal. As I've outlined to Councillor Bolton in an extensive discussion today, I am truly in support of the spirit of this motion. I want as many people to be engaged in the planning process as we possibly can. However, what we've been trying to do is get a better process. There are statutory requirements in terms of what type of consultation and when people get to air their objections. And as Councillor Davidson outlined, we've got a number of those processes which we observe fully. So all participants, all objectors are able to come to an urban planning committee and have the negotiation and mediation there and consultation there if they wish to. There are further things that we try to do as a council to enhance that process to get better outcomes. Planning information discussion sessions, I don't think are mandated by any law. And I think different councils determine the way they do their consultation. It's a form of mediation, as the director outlined. There's consultation, there's mediation, there's information. So if you think about it as a mediation session, it is trying to get a better outcome. Now, the issue I have with this motion is that it doesn't leave any discretion for an alternative form of mediation to be found if the circumstance arises. There are examples when the planning officers are well aware that there are opposing views amongst the group of objectors, because not all groups of objectors have a unanimous opinion. There's objection within the objectors. And when that happens, they might have cause to actually consult a number of meetings or a couple of smaller group meetings plus a bigger group meeting. We have workshopped this through over the last couple of years and tried different incarnations. The current incarnation that we have is an effort to improve the process on the incarnation previous to that, and I think there was a time when we'd invite all objectors to the process. I believe that the planning officers try their best to include as many people as possible in the process. This comes to Urban Planning Committee. The planning councillors are consulted on which sessions, which matters will go to PID, the level of consultation, the level of notification to objectors. There is active dialogue with councillors at those steps in the process, and I'm confident in that process. I don't think it's perfect. And I want to improve it, but I don't think this is the mechanism to improve it. I still think there needs to be some discretion because we're still trying to make it a better system. And this locks in just a one-size-fits-all approach. And we have learned from the past, which is why we moved away from that approach approach doesn't work when you're trying to mediate an outcome. So I'd love something before us that actually improves the outcome. I just think we've tried this before. It hasn't worked. And we've used the evidence to improve the system, which is why I don't want to support this motion, but I'd be happy to support another motion that improves the process and introduces a staged approach to this resolution. Councillor Tapinos.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some concerns with the vague nature, I guess, of planning consultation and what they are effectively, and whether that would include the officers organising a one-on-one with a developer and a particular resident who is affected. It's quite often the case that there might be residents, a particular resident which is more adversely impacted on by development compared to other residents. And although the other residents' views should be heard, and I fully support the part of the motion that says planning and information discussions should have invitations to all objectors, I do think that we don't need to limit or prohibit the organisation and officers from being able to organise a smaller meeting with one objector to deal with those issues that particularly impact on that objector's property. And it might be overshadowing, it might be where a window is placed, it might even be what the setback is from their boundary. So those issues are best dealt with on a one-on-one basis, or one or two objectors, as opposed to having all objectors present. And I like to see officers retain that right. But I don't believe this motion actually prohibits them from doing that. And therefore, in principle, I support the motion, but I just like it noted that officers should still retain that right where they see fit to organise extra additional meetings, which could be one-on-one with planning officers, objector, and the applicant to resolve those specific questions. But I am happy to be supportive of it because I believe that we are seeing quite a number of instances where objectors expected and wanted information and discussion, and when they got that and that occurred, they were quite disappointed not to get an invitation. And I think from a practice perspective that needs to change, and I'm therefore happy with the resolution and be supporting it.
I've got Councillor Kavanagh and then Councillor Gillies.
I'm going to speak against the motion. Firstly, Councillor Tapinos, if you do support this motion, then that won't be able to take place, because it's making it very clear that we're taking away the officer's right to do that. It's very clear in the motion that that's not going to be able to happen again. I hear what you're saying. I was one of the people who was concerned. Marilyn expressed that very well before. She was exactly right what she said. I was concerned about not all objectors being invited to the mediation session. We've since been briefed by officers, and I am a councillor who's been at probably over 100 PIDs in my time. And as much as I've participated in those, I have left many of them frustrated that we haven't had many concessions in those PIDs. I'm convinced now, as a result of what officers have said, that the new system is bringing about more satisfactory changes to directly affected residents. I'm convinced by that, and that's the reason why I won't be supporting this motion. And I thought I had need to stand to explain to Marilyn in particular why I'll be voting that way.
Councillor Gillies?
Okay, I'm actually supporting this motion, and I'll tell you why. Because in any negotiation, especially in terms of urban planning, the developer has the expertise and the know-how and the resident doesn't. In my experience, there is strength in numbers, and that's the reality. And developers listen to numbers. That's why they listened, they listen and take a townhouse off, because there might be 200 people turn up and they realise that there is a very strong, movement against what they're proposing. And there have been instances where, and one in Flannery Court Oak Park, where residents have managed to stall developers for over 2 years from actually building. And, that was because the system that was in place at that time didn't work, so they used other means. What I'm saying is that there needs to be a balance of power. Both sides need to have, an equal voice in any negotiation, and I think numbers does that, and I think that if there are a number of objectors, they should all be present.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. I believe Councillor Tapinos is thinking about an amendment. There could be there's a procedural way around this in terms of coming back to the item if anybody wants to take their course, if there's an amendment before us, given the time. So if people want some time to think about it and work up an amendment.
Just add that council officers may choose to.
Councillors, I don't want to workshop the amendment right now. We're really running out of time. Yeah. So if there's a procedural motion, if there's an amendment on the table, or is it a procedural motion to come back to this item, I'm welcoming it now. Otherwise, we're going to move on.
Having already spoken, I'm not sure if I can move a procedural motion.
Yes, you can move a procedural motion at any time, Councillor Tapinos. A procedural motion can be moved at any time.
I'll move a procedural to lay it on the table until we get some word.
Okay.
If that's acceptable.
I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour of laying the motion on the table? All those against? I declare that carried. So we can come back to that item when we've reworked some words. We're now moving on to DED 616, which is Pentridge Heritage Matters. Do I have a mover for the report recommendation?
I could move the report with my, an alternative resolution.
Certainly, please, Councillor Bolton.
If that was acceptable for councillors.
Yes, you're the first one on your feet, so you can move a motion. You can move any motion regarding this matter.
So I'd like to move the motion that I submitted earlier, but I've got one small modification. So the motion reads, the council resolved to note this report. 2, that council writes the owner of the Coburg quarter land outlining their objections under the Section 173 agreement, requesting that they meet their outstanding obligations in relation to the agreement without delay. 3, to take steps to ensure that the covenant with Heritage Victoria that parts of D Division be used for a museum are enacted. If the heritage of D Division has been too degraded since its restoration, that consideration be given to creating a museum in another suitable building such as F Division. 4, to take steps to ensure that heritage interpretation on the site be done under the supervision of a suitably qualified professional and overseen by an advisory committee involving heritage and history specialists. 5, to take urgent steps to assess the level of deterioration of and preserve the painting by renowned Aboriginal artist Ronald Bull and other paintings by former Aboriginal and other prisoners. 6, to have a moratorium on any further actions and or permits which might adversely impact on heritage on the Pentridge site, including the heritage overlay, until a review of the current Pentridge master plan has been completed. The council calls on the State Planning Minister to also enact a moratorium on any further actions and or permits which might adversely impact on the Pentridge site's heritage until a review of the current Pentridge master plan has been completed. In addition, that it be acknowledged that the high-rise towers that dwarf significant heritage structures such as the prison wall and the watchtowers be considered to have an adverse impact on heritage. Then I'd like to add in a new point 7, which is partly the same as point 6, but not entirely. That reads, to have a moratorium and any further actions and or permits which might adversely impact on the heritage overlay trees and open space along Champ Street. And then the final point 8, the councillors be notified of any action permits which could have an adverse impact on the heritage of the Pentridge prison site.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Hopper. Councillor Bolton, do you want to speak to the motion? And we're also getting some advice in terms of some of the requests within the motion, i.e. the ask for a moratorium and whether it's in our power to actually grant a moratorium. So we might get some advice on that, but are you happy to speak to it first and then come back to that?
Yes, I will speak to it. I mean, you know, unfortunately we've lost a lot of heritage. Part of H Division has, you know, the exercise yards, which are not wire exercise yards, but a bluestone building have been demolished. We lost that fight. I think it was in the year before last, in 2014. We've seen the holes in the wall in Champ Street, and while the holes in the wall look bad now, just imagine what those holes in the wall will look like with huge stream of traffic streaming out, especially if the 19-storey and several 15-storey buildings get built within Pentridge. That will the holes in the wall won't look like they do now. They'll look much, much worse. You know, we've seen that the developers haven't honoured some of their commitments, and in fact the commitment from the state government at the time that there would be a museum was never honoured or acted, or as far as I can tell, seriously pursued. And, you know, comparing this to, well, some residents have talked to me about the Abbotsford Convent and what was done at the Abbotsford Convent or what was done at Port Arthur. You know, this is a site which traces the social history of Australia from the early Aboriginal prisoners, Aboriginal freedom fighters and others who were imprisoned on the site. Then we had the people involved in the Eureka Stockade. We had people imprisoned who are campaigners against the conscription in the First World War. We had draft resistors during the Vietnam War. We had trade unionists. We've had all sorts of people imprisoned in Pentridge, including people for crimes that are not crimes anymore, and that is for being gay or lesbian. So, you know, there's a huge social history in the site which is not, I gather, not been fully recorded. The Aboriginal heritage on the site, I gather, has never been fully documented, and possibly other things. I understand the painting by Aboriginal artist Ronald Bull, who I really hadn't heard of until last year, and found out only by accident through a Wurundjeri elder. He is up there in the art world with Albert Namatjira. I don't know him. He's not a household name, but he is up there. And the painting, if you compare the picture of the painting now with the picture on the Heritage Victoria site, it appears to be degraded. And we also have been told by the new developer on the site that there are other Aboriginal murals on the site which aren't mentioned in the report. I don't know where they are or the status of them or quality of them or how degraded they may be. But I believe there need to be some urgent steps taken to try and preserve and for residents to take control of the site.
Councillor Bolton, just make your way 3 minutes up.
The other point I'd like to make mention of, which hasn't been made mention of by the state government or the council so far, is the question of high-rise development on the site. For example, National Trust says that none of the development should appear above the prison walls. I believe that a 19-storey building right nestled up against the wall actually destroys the heritage value of the site, considering a number of cities around the world don't allow development in certain areas above the height of a particular important heritage building, such as a cathedral.
Councillor Bolton, can I please ask you to wind up?
Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Councillor Hopper, would you like to speak to the motion?
Oh, look, very briefly, because I know that we are pressed for time, and I have spoken on this at Urban Planning Committee. I know that a number of people who are in the audience this evening were also in attendance at Urban Planning Committee. For so many years, Moreland City Council has not been the responsible authority on the site at Pentridge, and so Councillor Bolton makes a number of comments around the fact that we have watched over the years as heritage on the Pentridge site has gotten away from us. And there have been various comments in the media over recent weeks in relation to, it's a prison and, how positive is the history that we're preserving here? Should we be doing this? But at the end of the day, history is history and heritage is heritage, and we need to preserve the good and the bad of our history and understand it and learn from it. And the news that there is art on site, in particular Indigenous art, of significance, and that is apparently degrading, is of great concern to me as councillor responsible for arts and culture, and I would certainly like to see any measures take place which ensure that we do preserve and protect the art on the site. So I commend Councillor Bolton for bringing that forward this evening and for raising that as a point of concern. And I'll just reiterate again what I said at Urban Planning Committee meeting. I'm absolutely opposed to any concept of a 19-storey development on this site. I want to make very clear to members of the public who might be in the gallery or who are watching at home that this is not a council decision, and the council has repeatedly objected to and voted against the idea of a 19-storey development on the Pentridge site, and we will continue to do that. And I've been really reaffirmed by watching my fellow councillors continue to vote against the idea of having a 19-storey development in Coburg. It's absolutely not the right community for 19 stories, and it's not what people living in Coburg want.
I might now move to the Director, if you can provide us, that's okay, or the CEO, just in terms of some of the content of the motion, in terms of the request, what's within our power from reading it initially. People might need some time to consider it given the significance of the motion.
Certainly. Through the Mayor, just to confirm that obviously items 1 and 2 are in accordance with the report, and to clarify that the report was in response to the previous notice of motion seeking an outline of items that have been destroyed. It didn't address the 19-storey building because that had been addressed by UPC on the previous meeting. In terms of taking steps to ensure about the covenant, I also refer Council to its general business item in November last year, where we wrote to Heritage Victoria regarding that matter and seeking preservation of the panopticon as well in that regard. So the authority that is to look after that covenant and also protect all of the items that are in this motion is Heritage Victoria, and Council is seeking its attention to those matters. So in terms of taking steps, if that is to write again, it just needs to be clarified what the steps are. The covenant is with Heritage Victoria and not the Council. The 173 agreement is with Council, but the covenant is with Heritage Victoria. In terms of the steps then to undertake the interpretation on the site and the supervision, that is within the 173 agreement that requires a suitably qualified person to prepare those plans. It has been prepared previously by the previous owners to Shea and been endorsed with Heritage Victoria. So they have one in place, but Pentridge on future estate don't have one, which is again why we're writing to them seeking that. In turn, the Aboriginal artwork would be all part of that. It's part of that covenant. The moratorium, there are no powers for Council not to consider an application. So if we didn't consider applications, the immediate step would be to appeal a failure to make it determine an application. So then it would be VCAT making a decision at this stage as a responsible authority on those decisions. In terms of call-ins to the Planning Minister, again, there was a recommendation at the last council meeting, I think it was, further to the UPC decision to write to the Minister and request a meeting with the Minister and to actually seek a meeting on site with the Minister around that. And the UPC decided also for the master plans to be reviewed. And then finally, there was a lot added to 6, I'm sorry. Yeah, so that moratorium and the review of the master plans, unfortunately, they can't be tied together.
Okay.
Then the review of the master plans has already been requested by council through UPC. And 7 repeats, a bit of 6 there. So
thank you very
hopefully
much.
that helps.
Thank you very much for that explanation and having to do a lot of that very quickly. We really appreciate it. Given the gravity of this motion before us, and I believe that we need a little bit more clarification about what is within our powers to ask for and not, and perhaps some amendments. One way forward is for us to have our adjournment now to be able to consider some alternative to work those through. We could put the motion up, but I personally I feel uncomfortable voting on it given the level of complexity, and I just want to get a bit more clarity. But I'm in councillors' hands. If you want to move an adjournment now, we could use adjournment to workshop an amendment.
I'd like
we can press ahead.
I'd like us to debate the method of voting item before an adjournment. So I will move to put this item on the table.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of putting this item on the table? All those against? I declare that carried. We'll now move on to voting. We've got one general business item. We'll go to the voting first and then come back to the general business item if that's okay. Councillor Kavanagh, so it's DCS 116, Method of Voting Council Elections, October 2016.
I move the council resolves that the 2016 Moreland City Council general election be conducted by means of postal voting, and if I have a seconder.
Is there someone to second this motion? Councillor Davidson. Councillor Kavanagh.
I reserve my right to speak to close the debate, please.
Okay, sure. Councillor Davidson, would you like to speak to this motion? No? Okay, no problem. Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Tapinos. Councillor Tapinos is on his feet. I saw him first. You can go next, Councillor Hopper.
Thank you, Mayor. I like to speak against the motion, but in doing so, foreshadow a motion to continue attendance voting. If so, Councillor Kavanagh's motion fails, we will then debate attendance as the preferred method. But I'll take the opportunity to speak now against the motion, and in doing so probably touch on the issue at hand. And as I mentioned during question time, it is quite a complex one, and we do need to consider the issues of money as well, particularly in a rate-capped environment. However, considering the substantial benefits that I believe are obtained by an attendance ballot, and that includes having the community come out and vote as they normally do in a state and federal election. It includes making sure that there is significant notification to the community by them receiving an easy voting card, by them seeing the election, physically seeing it take place on election day. I think that is quite good. It raises awareness of council, it raises awareness of local government, and I believe it actually does encourage people to come out and vote. I do note the statistics prove me wrong, but as was pointed out in the gallery, it is a higher proportion of non-resident ratepayers who probably are making sure that those statistics in favour of postal are skewed in favour of postal when that occurs. And in fact, most of our community will be reminded of the fact of an election when they see it occurring. And for that reason, it is a positive for council and local government and something we should consider. I think the costs as a campaigner are significant. They're significantly more with attendance, but I think it's worth, as a campaigner, I think it's worth undertaking those costs. I think it's worth printing how to vote cards, worth having the conversations with residents when they come to the polling booth. I believe that if we were to eliminate that and have postal, we would see more candidates who are not serious about running. As I mentioned before, it is significantly easier to actually undertake a campaign in a postal vote environment because you've got to write 150 words and put in the photo. And I think you'll find many people, many non-serious candidates doing that. It's far easier to do that than it is to actually print off how to vote cards, find volunteers to actually hand out how to vote cards for you, and undertake a normal campaign as we see in state and federal elections. So I think if the objectives are to decrease dummy candidates, if they're so called. I think if the objectives are to make sure that there is more accountability in the process, and quite often I hear terrible stories from postal ballots where candidates have gone, or campaign assistants have gone off to people's houses, coerced them to vote in front of them in their living rooms, people they know, or collect ballots, all these things which are against the Local Government Act. But unfortunately, they are easier to do.
Councillor Tapinos, time.
In that event. So I think for all those reasons, we should go with the more expensive options. Democracy is not cheap. This is one of those cases where we probably need to make sure that we spend a little bit of money to get a better outcome for our community.
Thank you, Councillor Tapinos. Councillor Hopper, you wanted to speak?
I also wish to speak again, so unless there's a speaker in favour prior to me.
No?
No?
Please proceed.
Look, I'll speak against the motion and in favour of Councillor Tapinos' foreshadowed motion. I think that attendance voting is so important in terms of encouraging active participation in our democratic process. It encourages people to get down to the booth and engage with their candidates and have the opportunity to meet us face to face on election day when they're making that all-important decision about who to vote for. It also encourages candidates to actually go out there and do the work and make sure that people put names to faces rather than just being a face in a photo in an envelope. I think that the perception of local government is heightened by having attendance voting. We have attendance voting for federal elections, we have it for state elections. If we don't have it for local government elections, if all it is a letter every 4 years, the people don't think very much of local government elections. They sort of think, oh, well, that's the one that I can throw away and get over and done with very hastily, and it's not as important as the federal and state where everyone gets out and talks to us. I think that the matter that was raised by some of the questioners earlier about the possibility of developers and other people running stooge candidates and supporting people through postal vote is a really valid one, and also property owners versus residents. So the idea that people who actually live in the municipality are engaged more by turning out for attendance voting, whereas the increased uptake of voting, rather, in postal vote elections is primarily people who don't live within the electorate. It's people who live outside of the electorate and own property in the electorate or own businesses in the electorate. I think that as well, I mean, the comment has been made about costs for candidates and that it costs more to run an attendance voting election. I would dispute that. I think that there's costs on either side of this argument. Postage has gone up. We all know that it went up to $1 per envelope as opposed to 70 cents per envelope on the 1st of January. And I was a candidate in the South Ward who ran addressed mail in the last election, which is the process of actually putting a name and address on the front of the envelope so that people are more likely to receive and read the letter. I can tell you it is not cheap, and that then posting these things out to get them there in a timely manner before postal votes arrive, which is much earlier than election day, is also not cheap. So I would not be looking forward to the cost of trying to run a postal vote campaign, and I think that that really disadvantages independents and people who are seeking to run for the first time. Whereas with an attendance voting campaign, you can get out your volunteers and your friends, and you can run a fairly grassroots campaign, paint your own core flutes or signs and throw them on a fence, as I did last time, and that's an opportunity to, you know, try and shave some costs off. So I think the cost argument goes either way. So I'm very strongly in favour of attendance voting.
Are there any further speak? Councillor Yildiz would like to speak.
Can I just say, as much as I hate saying this because it does mean there's a lot more work with attendance voting, but our residents have never ever had postal voting. They're used to the state system, they're used to the federal system. Now if we throw this in, it might actually confuse a lot of them. Just a couple of key points. Early voting centres or voters also have the opportunity to put in a postal vote if they want to and in fact not attend. It's the same, as I mentioned, the same system. Made a couple of notes here. Community interaction with candidates gets the community out. They also get to see the candidates face to face and there's no photo shopping there. Voters also see their name being marked.
Please proceed, Councillor. Please proceed, Councillor Yildiz.
The voters see their name being marked off the roll, which is good. Also, postal can mean there's less activity happening, in particular with candidates coming out and visiting the respective polling booths. But one last comment I wanted to make was that, as Councillor Tapinos did make the comment, it does encourage some candidates to resort to some really let's just say, inappropriate behaviour, and our municipality here has had a number of candidates in the past that have done some pretty disgraceful things, which I don't want to go into detail. But it certainly limits the amount of dummy candidates too. And I think with the current climate, with I think people's perception of politics at the moment, I think it'd be better if we did remain consistent with the way that we've been doing things for the last 50 years. I think it's probably not the appropriate time to do it now. But in saying that, I get the advantages of postal as well. But I've had, unfortunately, consider.
Thank you, Councillor Yildiz. I might move now to Councillor Kavanagh to close the debate, unless there's anybody who wants to say something really quickly. Yes, Councillor Gillies. And then I'll move
Just
to
very
Councillor
quickly, I'm all for attendance voting, and that's mainly because regardless of how you run your campaign or whatever, it is a really good way for people to actually meet with you face to face on their way in and actually ask you questions and find out who you really are before they make their vote. So instead of just being the glossy little photo with the little paragraph of how wonderful you are, they can actually ask you where you stand on issues, and I think that's really important because people want to be educated before they actually vote, and I think that's an important part of the attendance voting system.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. Councillor Kavanagh to close the debate.
I'll try not to be too long, and I'll stick to my time, so I'll just give you a couple of random points. It was actually my brother Kevin, my oldest brother Kevin, that pointed out to me after the last election when I went to collect my call flutes off him the day after the election. He said, what did you do to those people at election day when he was giving out? He said, you had these people throwing the how to vote cards of people they've never seen before, no idea who they were, people getting harassed at the booths. He said, surely it's much better that a person comes in their own table, sits down and reads about each of the candidates in their own time. And that was borne out by the informal voting last election. At the last election, in the northern wards, and we talk about being concerned about our CAL communities in the northern ward, over 9,000 people voted informal. They came to a polling booth and found it too difficult to fill out that many names, etc. In fact, in the northeastern ward, the highest individual candidate was Councillor Lenka Thompson. Congratulations with 3,102. But if a person named informal had a run, he got 5,817. He got his quota in his own right, informal. No other candidate did in the northeastern ward. In fact, in the northwestern ward, only one candidate beat informal. Congratulations, Councillor Yildiz. You got 5,108. You're the only person around this table from the north and the northwestern and northeastern wards that beat their informal opposition. You're the only person. Informal won in the northeast and came second in the northwest. Right? That's 10,000 people with the intention of voting that found it a very confusing process that had very few details about the people that were throwing how to vote cards at them. You talk about stooge candidate. We had 24 candidates in the northeast ward. Yes, I'm sure all those were very genuine candidates. I'm sure. We had 17 candidates in the northwest ward. I'm sure they were genuine candidates. I actually think at the postal voting it goes against stooge candidates. I've had the experience of being a scrutineer at a postal voter council voting, right? And the preferences do not flow as closely as they do from the how to vote card. In other words, people sit down at their table and they work out, that sounds okay, and they don't take as much notice of the how to vote card because they have more information. But of course, we'll give them less information. We'll give them... The Victorian Electoral Commission won't even allow us to put a 150-word statement of the candidates when they give out the easy vote. All they get is a list of names, nothing else.
That's wrong.
Nothing else. They get less information about the people who are standing before them. Right? Less information. And we talk about, we're in the first year of rate capping. If we go by the costs that are quoted in the report, if we get the same attendance as the same amount of people voting this election as the last election, every single vote will cost $11.56. $11.56 under attendance voting. If we include the informal voting, it goes out to $14.20 for every formal vote. So every formal vote under the last system costs $14.20 per vote.
Councillor Kavanagh, sorry, you're at time, so please summarise. No, please summarise.
Then, as far as looking at the same figures, With postal voting, it's $7.50. I tell you, go out there in the community and tell them that their vote is costing the ratepayer, each person who goes to vote, $14.70. I know what the answer will be. We're not worth it.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. So I'll now put this item to the vote. The item before us is to support postal voting, noting that there is a foreshadowed motion if this fails to propose an alternative that proposes in attendance voting for the next local government election. So I'll put this motion to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that lost. I'd like now to ask the foreshadowed motion. Councillor Tapinos, would you like to propose the
I
foreshadowed motion?
move the foreshadowed motion as stated before.
Yep. And Councillor Yildiz is supporting that motion. I believe that we've had sufficient debate.
Can I move an amendment?
Certainly. Councillor Kavanagh is moving an amendment.
That we approach the VEC about having the early voting centres being open for 1 week only.
Yes, please.
Is that amenable to the mover and seconder?
It is, and I actually thought Councillor Kavanagh might actually also request to seek that an opportunity for a 150-word statement and a photo also be included in the easy
They may
voter
change their view
card.
after what they do.
I'm just going to give everyone a minute just to catch up with the wording of that. So we've got the correct wording on the screen.
And also just flagging that the seconder is incorrect. It was Councillor Yildiz.
Councillor Tapinos, do you want to speak briefly to this motion? We've had sufficient debate, but while that's being written up, there's a bit of time.
I might just speak briefly in regards to the two additional points, which unfortunately I think the response from the Electoral Commission might actually be no. But I do think that Councillor Kavanagh is correct in regards to the information that is provided to electors, and it would be great to have additional information distributed free of charge, and that would help independence, but it will also make the elections more equitable for all candidates to actually have something 150-word statement and a photo distributed on their behalf free of charge. When I say free of charge, of course, the nomination fee of $250 or so more and truly should cover that additional cost. I don't think it's much of an additional cost because they do send out the easy card anyway. So I think that would be fantastic. I do think it's a tiring campaign for 2 weeks. So 1 week would be sufficient. I hope that they do provide a discount in their services to reflect that. Again, I think they may not, but I think we should ask that question nonetheless. And I think that's all I have to say. The debate is quite
Thank you, Councillor.
Can I
Councillor
just
Yildiz, last
question
comment?
that?
Yep.
What is the, James, what is the power of us saying that we would like it to be only a week rather than 2 weeks? Is it likely that would in fact, if it's a council resolution, don't they need to reflect that?
We'll investigate. The Director, would you like to answer that briefly?
Through the Mayor, my understanding is we can make that request of the VEC, but not necessarily determine it ourselves.
So the VC has the ultimate say, but we will put the request forward. So I believe I'm going to put the motion to the vote.
Can I just speak against, just with one point?
Sure. Last comment, Councillor Kavanagh.
One other point why I'm against attendance election at this election is that the federal election is looking like it's going to be September, October. If we end up with 1 week we're going to a federal election and the next week we're on a council election, just watch the residents see how happy they'll be about turning up for a council election the following week.
Fair point. And thank you everyone for indulging the debate. I think it's such a significant item that we did need to exhaust the debate and hear the different views across the table because it will affect this council for at least the next 4 years in terms of the outcome.
So let some people talk and some people not.
Is there any further debate? Does anybody else want to speak on this item?
I just think that was inappropriate.
That's not inappropriate.
Debate is still open. I'm still calling for speakers. I haven't closed debate. I've indicated that we'd like... Councillors, please. We're still in formal meeting. Are there any further speakers? Are there any further speakers on this item? Debate is still open. Okay, everyone's had a...
We've heard, I think we've
Yep,
heard both
okay.
sides.
So I think councillors now want to put this to the vote. I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried.
Can I have a division first?
Yeah.
For division?
For division, yes. Councillor Kavanagh? That's been counted. I'd like to ask for an extension of time before we have an adjournment because we've actually gone over time. Is there an extension of time for half an hour that any councillor is asking for? Councillor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Bolton. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried. Is there a mover for an adjournment, for 10-minute adjournment? Councillor Yildiz?
No, can we have
5-minute adjournment?
Just 5.
Councillor Yildiz. And I think it's procedural motion, so we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried. We'll just have a 5-minute break, everyone. Thanks.